Live service video games. To many seasoned players, those four words are now a kiss of death for the latest big releases. But it wasn't always this way. Over the last 15 years or so, live services have gone from an exciting new frontier for the industry to a manipulative black hole of creativity, design, and player wallets. How did this happen? Why are so many studios so hell-bent on chasing such an awful trend? Where does the genre go from here? Let's take a look back at the rise and potential fall of live services. The story begins in the early days of the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. With the greater emphasis of online play and the new onset of downloadable content, developers started to experiment with new production models and digital distribution. Smaller map packs and mid-sized expansions gradually made their way onto the PlayStation Network, Xbox Live Marketplace, and Steam. With increased internet speeds and more widespread connectivity, these digital marketplaces quickly took off. At first, these new products were very well received. The idea of supporting a game after launch seemed like a great idea, a means to keep players coming back for more while building on the base game. Through the years, we would receive some standout expansions that kept us invested in older titles. Some of the best efforts included Red Dead Redemption Undead Nightmare, Mass Effect 2 Lair of the Shadow Broker, Gears of War 3 Ram Shadow, as well as the continuing MMO expansions. The online stores gave players a taste of what developers could do with their games. No longer would they be limited by a single DVD or Blu-ray disc. Instead, we could buy entirely new levels, in-game items, and other added extras. Between 2006 and 2009, much of the reception was positive. Supporting games after they were released, giving us more of what we enjoyed, it seemed like a solid step forward. But underneath the surface, sinister motives were brewing, personified by the infamous Horse Armor DLC for The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. Suddenly, the higher-ups at game studios realized that players would pay far more than the initial $60. How they exploited this avenue would come to define modern gaming as it is today. The seventh console generation bestowed the community with many new franchises. One of them would foreshadow the rise of live service games in a big way. Borderlands from Gearbox Software combined the first-person shooter and RPG genres to create a unique new blend, the looter-shooter. Damage numbers pinged off of enemies as they were shot, new weapons and equipment were constantly bestowed on players, characters could be leveled up constantly with skill trees, including some unique abilities. Last but not least, cooperative multiplayer for up to 4 players was a major centerpiece of the package. In effect, Borderlands laid down the blueprint for what would eventually become the live service genre, including the use of multiple DLC packs like the Secret Armory of General Knox. This approach would continue throughout the franchise, all the way up to Borderlands 3 in 2019. 1 year later in 2010, another major milestone was reached. On the stage of Sony's E3 press conference, Valve CEO Gabe Newell first coined the term entertainment as a service, and talked about a socially connected experience. Despite this high-profile announcement, live service elements were mostly confined to MMOs early into that decade. Expansion packs and regular updates were frequently applied to the likes of World of Warcraft and Guild Wars 2, while console updates remained few and far between. Most game studios were not yet ready to incorporate these continuous changes. Things began to move forward in 2013 with the launch of 2 major titles, Grand Theft Auto Online and Warframe, which are both going strong to this day. The 5th GTA title was an excellent base to launch wider online modes, and Warframe drew players in with a capable gameplay formula. Eventually, the line would be drawn between fully paid titles and free-to-play releases, with the former being far more contentious. With the arrival of the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One in late 2013, downloadable content, expansion packs, and a small amount of cosmetics were already common fixtures in the gaming industry. To expand on existing online spaces, more and more developers began to incorporate MMO elements into their titles. No longer would matchmaking be a simple case of connecting to a match with random players. Instead, communities would inhabit a persistent online space, which often went hand in hand with open-world design. Grand Theft Auto Online was one of the first titles to pioneer this new setup, blending the free-flowing shenanigans of the single-player mode with versus battles. However, the key to the game's success through the years was the built-in economy. The task of leveling up, earning more in-game currency, and spending it on an ever-expanding content pool was a highly addictive formula, one that would eventually lead to all sorts of underhanded tactics. GTA Online brought in shark cards for players who didn't want to slowly work their way up the property ladder, and the increments grew larger over time. Why pay $5.99 when you can pay £60 to get your hands on everything instantly? Back then, the promise of the next generation was spearheaded by Bungie and their grand project with Activision. Of all the games in the early days of the 8th generation, Destiny was by far the most anticipated in 2014. With the former developers of Halo at the helm and a whopping $500 million development cost, players were confident that this title would pull out all the stops and deliver a standout experience. However, on release, many fans were left disappointed as Destiny took many steps back in terms of storytelling and overall design. It wasn't the excellent title many had hoped for and marked the first big disappointment of the 8th generation. The vanilla version of Destiny represents a serious problem with live services, a dangling carrot instead of meaningful content. The dangers of overzealous marketing and a hype cycle gone off the rails have been consistent problems in the gaming industry. Live services actively embrace these tactics more than any other genre. The dangling carrot is where the developer turns to the community and says, "Don't worry, the game will get bigger and better over time. Just stick with us for Season 2 or 3, and we'll guarantee you'll get more out of the experience." It's an excuse brought out to dismiss the lack of a satisfying story, a shallow content pool, and the onset of technical bugs and glitches. By claiming the game will grow and evolve over time, developers and publishers can deny ripping off those who purchase on launch day. These promises of longer, more detailed roadmaps would only grow more egregious over time. At this point, regular updates had become a key fixture in video games, but often they were based more on fixing major bugs and connectivity issues at launch, another trend that would persist. As the business practices grew worse, including the onset of monetization from mobile games, the few live service games that did succeed went from strength to strength. They boast the highest player count and therefore offer the highest potential for profits. Nowadays, one title from Epic Games sits above all the rest. While it started off as a Battle Royale last player standing title in 2017, Fortnite transformed into a live service game that could expand infinitely. To this day, it continues to build new connecting strands to every major franchise and property in the entertainment business. It's like an all-consuming Ouroboros, the ultimate form of the live service business model, delivering a seemingly endless stream of new players and rising profits. It also popularized the use of emotes, dances, and other cosmetic items. Of course, this gigantic success caught the attention of many studio executives who wanted a slice of that sweet live service pie. As we entered the latter half of the 2010s, more companies got up on stage at E3 and proclaimed that their games would stay with players for at least 5 years or more, not because they're especially memorable or engaging, but because they expect their communities to keep logging in and spending money in the shops. All the while, players were thrust into the second major problem of live services, grinding. This represents an incredibly lazy and underwhelming kind of game design, one that involves repeating the same tasks and killing the same enemies over and over again. The goal of powering up your character is a core tenet of role-playing games, but live services stretch this progression out to the point of tedium. Rather than gaining new abilities or ways to play, everything boils down to numbers. Weapon damage, player health, damage resistance, enemy resilience, and enemy numbers. By building the entire game around these statistics, developers have less need to create interesting scenarios, clever AI, or level designs. Instead, they can replicate the same gameplay loop, often shooting the enemy health bars, over and over again without much variation. Simultaneously, studios also turn to psychological manipulation, relying on addictive behaviors and the fear of missing out to turn players into payers, as one insidious press conference put it. Login bonuses, randomized loot boxes, flashy displays, and comparing your own inventory to others are all part of the grand plan. One report mentioned that kids are being pulled in early on, having been teased at school for their unimpressive emote collections. As the 2010s came to an end, gamers were really starting to sour on all the money-hungry schemes that made their way into games, both regular and live service. We witnessed the Star Wars Battlefront 2 loot box fiasco and other poor showings from just about every big-name publisher. Ubisoft tried their luck with Ghost Recon Breakpoint, which left the once proud series a shadow of its former self. Bethesda swindled millions with Fallout 76, an atrocious wreck on launch, and Square Enix cashed in with Marvel's Avengers, hoping to ride the coattails of the MCU's success. All of these titles were poorly received by players in their own ways, with the latter being completely shut down just a few years after launch. Perhaps the biggest failure of the bunch was Anthem from BioWare and EA in 2019. This ill-fated third-person RPG marked an utter failure of management and development. The chaos that unfolded behind the scenes at the studio has been well documented, and any efforts to salvage the game with a planned roadmap quickly fizzled as the community stopped playing in droves. The planned Anthem 2.0 was completely cancelled in 2020, an utter waste of BioWare's time, money and resources. It is now little more than a cheap paperweight. That brings me to the final and most fatal flaw of the live service genre, the requirement of online servers and connectivity. For starters, it allows developers to constantly gather data on the players, track their habits, and optimize the money-making systems for maximum efficiency. But it also emphasizes a product that you don't actually own. The YouTuber Accursed Farms put it best in his video, "Games as a Service is fraud," which I highly recommend watching. Even if a live service does have reasonably fun gameplay, it can all be stripped away when a dev team chooses to pull the plug and shut down the entire project. In short, many live services are simply not designed to deliver an enjoyable or memorable experience. Their prime directive is to retain as many players as possible, extract as much money out of them as possible, before being abandoned and pressing them towards the next looter-shooter fix. Now in 2024, many live service games in the AAA scene are tipping into a death spiral, and no other title typifies this more than Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. Rocksteady, the once proud developer of the Batman Arkham series, really dropped the ball with this one, as it features all the problems of live services and few of their previous strengths. On the other side of the aisle, Skull and Bones from Ubisoft is also failing badly, its promises of a quadruple A experience being absolutely laughable. Tell me, is this what we want out of video games? A mindless shooting gallery with the same missions and enemies over and over again? Chock full of endless pop-ups and damage numbers designed to cover up a shallow gameplay loop and design template? Many of the higher-ups seem to think so. Warner Bros. Recently said that they plan on doubling down on live services, with every single one of their major franchises set to be converted. On top of that, it was reported that over 500 studios are working on a live service release of some sort, an outrageous and unsustainable figure that will surely put hundreds of game developers out of work when their efforts inevitably fail. Surely at some point over the next couple of years, the industry will finally come to its senses and leave these misguided efforts behind. In conclusion, live services represent the absolute worst of modern gaming. They incorporate every money-grubbing tactic, suck out much of the enjoyable elements, and package it up in an experience that could be taken away at any moment. I don't blame players who wish we could go back to the days when games were released as a complete package on a single piece of physical media. Perhaps the only way is to simply refuse to play, let these live services fail, and challenge developers to do better. Thanks for watching. What should be done with live service titles? Would you be happy to see them go the way of the dodo? Let me know in the comments below. You can follow my blog and channel at the links in the description.